Imagine a routine court proceeding exploding into chaos in less than a heartbeat. 72-year-old Luther Rowe, a low-income black man, stands before the judge and, suddenly, Lieutenant Brent Rollins, gleaming in his badge, barks, "You think you belong here? Back under your bridge, old man." Before anyone can blink, Rollins' open palm crashes into Luther's cheek. Blood beads on his glasses. The courtroom goes dead silent. But while everyone else recoils, Luther simply straightens, retrieves a handkerchief, and wipes the wound his eyes, never leaving the man who struck him. In that moment, we don't just see brutality, we see the birth of a reckoning. From the gallery's rear, FBI agent Marcus Rowe calmly lifts his phone. No theatrics, just a silent witness capturing every damning frame. That footage will ignite a firestorm of outrage, forcing federal agencies to act, and exposing a system that had long tolerated such abuse. If you're ready for every twist, secret Pentagon calls, FBI raids, and a digital hurricane that rattles the halls of power, hit like and subscribe now. Drop a comment with your location. Are you watching from New York, London, or somewhere unexpected? We want to know. And ring that bell, because you won't believe the next twist in Marcus's relentless fight to hold the powerful accountable. Get set. This courtroom slap is just the spark. The real inferno of social media fury, live-streamed protests, and White House statement starts now. Don't look away. It's time to demand justice. One crisp morning in the Maplewood courtroom, 71-year-old Wallace Bryant, an elderly black man living on a meager income, stood before the bench with quiet dignity. The harsh overhead lights glinted off his silver-rimmed glasses, and the air was thick with the smell of varnish and cold coffee, like the stale breath of a system that had long forgotten its humanity. As Wallace adjusted his spectacles, every wrinkle on his weathered face told a story of years spent under unforgiving suns and even harsher realities. Without warning, Lieutenant Brent Drake, a white officer with a buzz cut and a uniform so starched it might have been ironed onto him, erupted in contemptuous laughter. "What are you doing up there, old man? Get back to your rat hole," he barked, voice echoing through the hushed room. Before Wallace could find words to answer, Drake's hand snapped out in a blur, and bap! The sound of that slap rang like a hammer striking cold steel. Blood spattered across Wallace's glasses, painting the lower rim crimson. The courtroom froze. Not a single person moved. No cries of outrage pierced the silence, only the muted gasp of one startled woman and the relentless whir of the ceiling fan overhead, marking that brutal moment in agonizing slow motion. Wallace, unmoved by pain or fear, reached into his coat pocket for a handkerchief, white, frayed at the edges, threaded with the echoes of a lifetime's worth of hardship. With methodical calm, he dabbed at the corner of his mouth, more concerned for the cloth stain than the wound on his lip. His eyes, usually gentle and wary, now shone with steady resolve. In that tranquil gaze lay a silent challenge to every prejudice entrenched in that courtroom, that no system, no matter how cold, could extinguish his dignity. From the very back row, FBI agent Malcolm Bryant Wallace's son stood, jaw clenched, fists tightening at his sides. He did not shout or storm forward. Instead, he locked eyes with the officer who dared to strike his father, and in that steel-quiet moment, made a vow: this act of violence would not be swallowed by silence. The moment that stinging slap landed, the entire courtroom fell into a stunned freeze frame. The defense attorney blinked, mouth agape, as if struggling to remember his next question. The judge hesitated, gavel poised but unused, caught between duty and disbelief. All eyes swung toward Lieutenant Brent Drake as he smoothed the sharp crease of his uniform jacket, button by button, with the casual air of a man who'd just carried out some grand crusade. His jaw quivered in self-satisfaction. He was convinced he'd sent a powerful message about who belonged in that room. Across the aisle, Wallace Bryant straightened his shoulders, lifting the weight of the moment from his face in a thin, wry smile. He raised a trembling hand to his spectacles, gently pushed them back into place, and spoke in a voice that carried clear over the hush. "I apologize, Your Honor. I merely stood up to speak the truth." Not a single head turned, not a murmur followed. Silence stretched taut between those words and the soft click of Drake's brow furrowing in irritation. Behind them, Malcolm Bryant sat as still as a statue, heart pounding. With deliberate calm, He pulled his phone from his jacket pocket and hit record. The little red light blinked privately, capturing every detail: the defiance in his father's posture, the contempt in Drake's narrowed eyes, the judge's reluctant gaze. Malcolm remembered how, in that split second, his father's eyes had registered shock, not the kind that betrays cowardice, but the flash of indignation and pride that comes when one endures an injustice without flinching. Slowly, as if awakened from a dream, the courtroom resumed its mechanical ritual. The clerk called out the next name. Paper files slid across the bench. Counsel shuffled documents, racing to recover lost momentum. The ceiling fan whirred on, perfunctory. The muted tick of a vintage wall clock pressed forward. Yet now, justice was no longer an abstract ideal to be invoked. In solemn phrasesse it had become visceral, blood-stained, steeped in the raw power of authority, turned violent. Malcolm lowered his phone, his grip tightening. He had filmed everything. He had witnessed the cold precision of a blow meant to enforce silence. Now, he held in his hand the undeniable proof that would shatter complacency. This video would fuel a storm of outrage, demand accountability, and expose a system that allows violence in the guise of order. He pressed stop, watching the final frame his father's unbowed silhouette against the glare of injustice. In that charged stillness, Malcolm knew he was holding the spark that could ignite a genuine fight for justice, and he would let it burn. As the proceedings trudged forward, a subtle shift rippled through the courtroom. No one's gaze remained fixed on Wallace Bryant's stoic figure, but instead flickered toward Malcolm Bryant, seated quietly in the back, phone still recording. The court interpreter hesitated mid-step, documents poised in hand, uncertainty flickering across her face as she glanced from the judge's bench to the old man on the stand. Lieutenant Brent Drake spotted the hesitation, eyes narrowing. He swept his gaze across the room, landed on Malcolm, and murmured loud enough for only a few to catch, "What's he planning over there?" Malcolm offered nothing more than a polite nod in response, and slipped his phone into his jacket pocket. His heartbeat thundered in his ears, every fiber of his being taut with resolve. The room felt as if it were filled with the quiet tension before a storm. Each faint shuffle of papers, every scratch of pen on paper, resonated like a drumbeat heralding an inevitable clash. Behind the bench, the judge finally cleared his throat, gaveling once with weary authority. "Proceed with the testimony." But the words fell flat, stripped of their usual weight. The mechanical rhythm of docket calls and file shuffling couldn't mask the raw breach of decorum that had just taken place. Papers fluttered, shoes scuffed the floor, but beneath it all lay a potent tension. Authority challenged. Silence is broken. Brent Drake rose, each step purposeful and heavy. His polished boots struck the wood plank floor with the deliberate cadence of a man stamping his dominance. He approached the witness stand again, shoulders squared, gaze locked on Wallace's unflinching profile. Every inch he closed the distance felt like a declaration, "I am the law in this room." Yet with each step, the courtroom's air grew heavier with anticipation, with outrage, and with something like dignity, rising to meet cruelty. On the other side of the room, Malcolm studied the unfolding scene, as if calculating the perfect moment to unleash his evidence. His mind raced through every millisecond of the video stored on his phone, the angle, the clarity, the undeniable proof of assault. He weighed the judge's waning authority against the undeniable power of truth exposed. And in that charged atmosphere, one figure emerged from the shadows of anxious spectators. Malcolm, dressed in a dark suit that blended into the wood-paneled walls, eyes alight with determination. He wasn't just recording history, he was ready to make it. With every fiber of his calm exterior, Malcolm Bryant prepared to ignite the moment that would expose the rot beneath the badge and demand that justice, finally, be done. Once the formalities concluded, Lieutenant Drake leaned over the bench and barked in clipped tones. "Red hoodie, roaming the streets at night, no ID, suspicious behavior." The court clerk nodded dutifully, quill scratching across the pages, while the bailiff stood motionless, expressionless behind them. From the interpreter's desk came a steady click, click, as each word was painstakingly translated, the sound echoing through the hushed chamber, like the drumbeat of an inescapable verdict. To onlookers, the scene might have seemed routine, A suspect in a hoodie, officers performing their duty. But beneath the veneer of order lay a far darker truth. Wallace's bruise throbbed with every sympathetic eye turned away. The lingering sting on his cheek was nothing compared to the psychic lash of a system that viewed him as less than a man. The cold metal bite of handcuffs at his wrists was a physical echo of the far deeper chains of bias and assumption that bound him. Drake straightened his uniform with an arrogant flourish and met Wallace's calm gaze head-on. His confidence was absolute. Hay believed that, here and now, his authority was unassailable. But in the back of the room, Malcolm Bryant's silhouette remained rooted in place. The overhead lights cast his long shadow across the polished floor, a silent sentinel bearing witness. In that dark outline lay a promise. Every instant was recorded. No detail could be erased. The judge, brow furrowed, cleared his throat, and moved to close the gap between ceremony and cruelty. "Proceed with the evidence," he commanded, but his voice lacked conviction. The courtroom's machinery whirred on papers, changed hands. Counsel whispered. Lawyers jostled for attention, but the brutality of this spectacle had stripped the ritual of its meaning. Justice no longer tasted of impartiality. It had a metallic tang, salty with blood and bitterness. As Malcolm stood almost outside the camera's frame, his phone tucked away, he felt the weight of every silent click bind him to his purpose. He knew that this was not simply another case file to archive. It was the flashpoint that would demand accountability. The bruise on Wallace's face was a testament to inertia. Now, captured in cold digital clarity, it would become the spark, igniting a reckoning no amount of procedural protocol could smother. In that heavy silence, the unspoken truth echoed louder than any gavel. Prejudice thrives when witnesses look away, and this time, Malcolm Bryant would not allow the world to turn its back. As the interpreter paused, Lieutenant Drake turned sharply toward Mr. Bryant and sneered, "Nobody cares about your pleas." With that, he jabbed Wallace's shoulder so forcefully that the court chair groaned under the pressure. The metal bite of the handcuffs dug cruelly into Wallace's wrist in agony, more physical than anything Drake could inflict with words. Yet Wallace did not flinch. He stood perfectly still, chin raised, spine unbowed, his eyes fixed on the mottled gray wall before him, as if to anchor his resolve. Every beat of his heart pulsed not with fear but with a quiet fury. The room's hush grew heavier around him, punctuated only by his controlled breathing. In that moment, Drake believed he had reminded an old man of his place, a powerless figure to be cowed by the lash of authority. What Drake failed to grasp was that the real fracture lay not in Wallace's spirit but in the very system that condoned such violence. Though the cuffs had drawn blood, and a bruise was already blossoming like a dark flower on his wrist, Wallace refused to yield to pain or humiliation. He knew it would cost him dearly to stand so defiantly. Perhaps he would be accused of contempt, perhaps even further mistreated. Yet he drew on decades of hardship, on the memory of every injustice he had endured, and stood tall. Each second that ticked by was a testament to his unbreakable dignity, a living rebuke to the notion that a man could be subdued through force alone. Lieutenant Drake shrugged, convinced he had merely delivered a stern reminder that no lesser man would dare challenge his authority. In Drake's narrow view, Wallace's stoicism was a sign of grudging compliance, proof that the system remained intact. He could not see the cracks creeping across the polished veneer of justice. He could not hear the faint click-click as unseen cameras captured every detail, very cruel thrust, every silent stand evidence that would soon erode the facade of invincibility he cherished. In that charged silence, the unspoken message resonated louder than any outcry. Brutal suppression may bend the body, but it cannot break an unwavering spirit. Wallace's steadfast posture spoke volumes more than tears or shouts ever could. His dignity, intact and radiating strength, shone as a beacon of what true justice demands: respect for the humanity in every individual, regardless of age or color. And in the back row, Malcolm Bryant watched it all unfold. He recognized the moment when violence stops being an assertion of order and becomes a sign of a system on the brink of collapse. He knew that the bruise on his father's wrist was no longer just a mark of pain, but the first crack in a wall that would soon crumble under the weight of truth. Suddenly, the heavy oak door to the courtroom swung open with a decisive crack. In the frame stood FBI agent Malcolm Bryant Wallace's son, clad in a tailored black suit. The sharp lines of his jacket contrasted with the soft patina of the courtroom's wood paneling, and the polished FBI badge pinned over his heart caught the harsh glare of the overhead lights. There was no siren, no drawn weapon, only the quiet authority of a man who bore real power. Malcolm moved with measured steps toward the defense table. The murmurs in the room hushed as he reached across the polished surface and laid his credentials before the judge. A stark rectangle of laminated identification that seemed to hum with unspoken weight. "Your Honor," Malcolm began, his voice calm yet commanding. "I am here on behalf of my father, Mr. Wallace Bryant. I will ensure his rights are fully protected." A stunned silence fell. Gasps flickered through the gallery. Witnesses, lawyers, even the bailiff paused mid-step. Lieutenant Brent Drake's swagger froze into uncertainty. He lowered his gaze, swallowed the next insult he might have launched, and watched, almost helplessly, as the balance of power in the room shifted irrevocably. No alarms blared, no threats were barked. Instead, the simple, unassailable presence of a senior federal agent collapsed the barricade of prejudice Drake had erected. The white uniform and buzz cut that had seemed so imposing a moment before now looked threadbare, bereft of real authority in the face of Malcolm's quiet dignity. Malcolm did not stride in like a conqueror. He did not flail his badge or bellow demands. He simply stood tall, folding his hands neatly before him, embodying both paternal love and professional obligation. In his eyes blazed a fierce protectiveness and unspoken promise that any further attempt to humiliate or injure his father would meet with the full weight of federal justice. As the courtroom's atmosphere crackled with tension, the judge nodded curtly. "Proceed," he said, acknowledging Malcolm's intervention without fanfare. The clerk resumed recording the minutes, but every scratch of ink on paper now resonated with renewed gravity. Brent shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He was used to commanding compliance through intimidation, to using his badge as both sword and shield. But against Malcolm's unwavering integrity and rightful authority, his own badge felt like a tarnished trinket. His earlier taunts and slaps receded into a tense memory. In that moment, the prejudiced assumption that a frail, elderly black man could be cowed by a white officer's cruelty collapsed entirely. It was replaced by the undeniable fact that real power resides not in muscle or rank, but in the steadfast resolve to defend one's loved ones, and in the rule of law that protects them. Malcolm Bryant was not a harbinger of vengeance. He was a guardian. No one in that room could afford to ignore. Not long after Malcolm quietly departed, a young legal intern slipped away from the courthouse and uploaded the video of Brent Drake's slap to social media. Within hours, the hashtag #JusticeForWallace was trending nationwide. Outrage spread like wildfire. Thousands of comments demanded accountability for Brent Drake and condemned the judiciary for enabling his cruelty. News outlets and online forums lit up with reshares, remixes, and commentary. Every platform ablaze with calls for an impartial investigation. Community groups organized flash polls. Civil rights organizations drafted petitions. Even late-night talk shows featured heated debates about institutional racism and abuse of power. No longer could the courtroom's oppressive silence suppress the truth. Every viewer who had once scrolled past courtroom dramas without a second thought now felt compelled to speak out. Pressure mounted on local officials. The district attorney's office announced a preliminary review of Drake's conduct. The state judicial council opened an inquiry into the presiding judge's failure to intervene. Comments flooded mayoral and governor's social media channels, demanding transparency. Citizens organized peaceful demonstrations outside the courthouse, holding signs that read, "Slap is not protocol," and "Black lives are not disposable." Behind closed doors, courthouse administrators scrambled. Emails exchanged between clerks revealed panic. Internal investigations were dusted off. Body cam footage was re-examined, and security logs were audited. No memo could suppress the roar of public demand. The interns who once feared speaking up found courage in numbers. They began sharing additional footage and court transcripts that highlighted Drake's pattern of hostility. Meanwhile, national media descended on Maplewood. The reporters interviewed eyewitnesses, legal experts, and community leaders, amplifying the outrage. Opinion pieces called for mandatory reforms. Every courtroom proceeding must be recorded. Every use of force complaint must trigger an independent review, and officers should be suspended pending investigation. Now, the once sterile halls of justice vibrated with accountability. The invisible walls of complacency cracked as citizens refused to forget. A single video clip had transformed into a movement demanding that no act of violence, especially one against the elderly and marginalized, slip quietly into the archives. The public's voice was no longer a whisper but a chorus. The system would have to answer. Brendan "Brent" Drake could no longer pretend this was just another routine day in court, because the world was watching, judging, and demanding that justice finally take center stage. The hush that settles over a courtroom when a hammer finally drops is nothing compared to the silence that descended on Maplewood that afternoon. Under a tidal wave of public outrage, the judge banged his gavel once and declared the trial postponed indefinitely. The words echoed through the paneled wall sand. With them came the weight of collective relief and righteous anger. Brent Drake, whose swagger once filled the room, now sat forlornly at counsel's table. Within hours, he was stripped of his badge and uniform and suspended from duty, awaiting both internal and criminal investigations. The empty rows of benchassants, occupied by murmuring onlookers, stood as mute witnesses to a system forced to reckon with its own failings. Each vacant seat felt like a promise unpaid, a testament to voices that had trembled in fear before now. Meanwhile, Wallace Bryant, still bearing the faint bruise beneath his spectacle stand, his son Malcolm, were escorted not back to that stifling dock, but to the county district attorney's office. There, prosecutors and defense attorneys gathered around a long table strewn with paperwork, transcripts, and evidence folders. Every document was examined, every signature verified, every page scrutinized under the bright fluorescent lights. For Wallace, the process was gut-wrenching yet oddly redemptive. He watched as his life's indignities embodied by a single, brutal slapware finally taken seriously. Each file he touched carried the weight of memory, the sting of the blow, the flash of wet blood on his glasses, the deafening silence of indifference. Tears welled in his eyes not from pain, but from the sheer gravity of being heard at last. Malcolm, usually the pillar of unflappable resolve, felt his chest tighten with both pride and sorrow. The gears of justice were grinding forward, albeit painfully slowly, but forward nonetheless. He recalled the dark look in his father's eyes the moment the slap landed, and now he saw those same eyes reflect cautious hope. Outside the DA's office, community advocates huddled in small groups, trading updates and pledging to stay vigilant. "We won't let this fade," they whispered with fierce determination. Social media streams brimmed with supportive messages. Justice delayed is justice denied. No more silence. Inside, the district attorney finalized a clear, public statement. "Abuse of authority will not stand in this county. Our office pledges a transparent, thorough review of every allegation. Victims of bias and violence deserve both acknowledgement and restitution." That day, the echo of the judge's gavel gave way to a different kind of resonance, the surge of communal accountability. Empty benches slowly filled with new purpose. Citizens committed to watching, ensuring that power without consequence remains nothing more than a relic of the past. After weeks of investigation and public outcry, Lieutenant Brent Drake finally faced the consequences he had long evaded. In a packed internal hearing room, the police department's professional standards unit delivered its verdict. Drake would be terminated from the force, stripped of rank and pension, and referred to the district attorney's office on criminal charges of abuse of authority and assault on a minor. But the real shockwaves came when prosecutors unearthed 3 decades-old cases that had quietly gone nowhere. Documents revealed Drake's hand in an unlawful custodial interrogation that left a teenager with fractured ribs, his systematic suppression of video evidence in a misconduct probe, and his interference in an independent inquiry into excessive force. Each file, once sealed or lost, was now reopened under glaring scrutiny. Those long-forgotten victims, a college student beaten for disturbing the peace, a young mother detained without warrant, a juvenile held without counsel, were finally acknowledged. In response, the state Supreme Court issued a landmark ruling mandating that every courtroom proceeding be audio-video recorded in its entirety, from arraignment to sentencing, ensuring that no victim's claim could be buried again. Judges, bailiffs, and clerks were instructed to maintain an unbroken digital record, accessible for appeal and public transparency. For Wallace Bryant, the elderly man whose dignified silence had ignited this reckoning, the moment was bittersweet. He took the stand as a key witness in Drake's criminal trial, no longer a passive victim, but a catalyst for change. His testimony, delivered with calm authority, mapped the arc from that brutal slap in a stained courtroom to the systematic concealment of Drake's transgressions. In his measured voice, he conveyed the quiet strength of a man who had been repeatedly overlooked, drawing nods of respect even from hardened prosecutors. As the judge pronounced Drake's sentence, say a term of 3 years probation, mandated community service in youth outreach programs, and restitution payments to each of his identified victims, the courtroom took in the full measure of his fall. His uniform had been replaced by civilian clothing. His badge, once a symbol of power, was surrendered and impounded. Brent Drake left the courthouse a free man technically, but with a reputation irrevocably shattered. Outside, reporters swarmed Wallace and his son, Malcolm. But it was not applause. They sought only affirmation that justice, though delayed, had prevailed. Wallace offered a quiet smile. "Today," he said, "we ensure that no one else will be silenced." And with that, a new era dawned on, in which accountability was more than a slogan, but a binding principle, enforced in every courtroom and embodied by the unwavering courage of a man who refused to look away. This story reminds us that silence in the face of tyranny is complicity in injustice. Every time we raise our voice, whether through a social media comment or a conversation with loved ones, we help ignite hope for those forgotten. The message is clear. We don't have to wait for a grand gesture to act. Even small steps like shares, petitions can create a powerful ripple effect. Now, let's share your perspective. How do you feel witnessing a child endure prejudice right in the courtroom? What would you do to protect the vulnerable? And in your view, by what year will we be able to say that racial bias has truly ended 2050, 2075, or beyond? Each prediction not only reflects personal belief but also inspires collective action. Leave your comment below and join the conversation, because it is through dialogue that we change minds, and through changing minds that we transform words into deeds, making justice a reality for all.